Hey everybody, it's Bob Crossan, Senior Managing Editor for Water and Waste Digest. Today I have with me Mia Lehrer. She is President and Founder of Studio MLA Landscape Architecture and Urban Design. And I also have Sarah Rascon. She is Environmental Equity Officer for the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority, also known as MRCA. Now we're going to be talking a little bit about the Upper Los Angeles River and Tributaries Revitalization Plan and what's going on with it out west. So thank you guys so much. I appreciate you so much for being on the call. It's just great to have you and to learn a little bit more about this plan. So let's start first by explaining a little bit about what water equity is. I guess I can pass that one first to you, Sarah, since it's part of your title. Could you describe what water equity is, how you would like to define it for our conversation today?
Sure. So when we think of water equity, we think of how you would utilize this resource for everyone's benefits, from groundwater capture, natural resources, people, reuse. How do we care for this natural resource? And how do we care for our environment while planning for future projects and assets for communities?
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah. Well, I then the next question is, what is ULART and how does it play a role in water equity? I'm not sure which one of you would like to field that one first.
Okay, I'll start by saying ULART was a state directive that derived from legislation. So our California legislature developed legislation that directed a local state agency that we worked with, being the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, who then directed my entity, the MRCA. And we worked with a group of wonderful consultants, including landscape architect Mia Lehrer and her team at Studio MLA, to develop a revitalization plan as a result of community input and a working group that was comprised of appointed officials.
Mhm. Yeah, so Mia, could you describe some of the missions and the goals of this of ULART and what it's aiming to accomplish?
Well, it's aiming to accomplish, basically, and to turn a sort of an underutilized, overly sort of built out set of resources, which are the tributaries. They're basically encased in cement, like
Mhm.
many projects across the country, but in particular in Southern California, that was the way of solving flooding issues. And so what the idea is, of course, is to bring back a healthier environment that prioritizes people and the natural resources, by allowing for there to be parks and trails, and turning parking lots and play areas in schools, all sort of into resources that are permeable, that allow water to percolate, and really creating sort of a new sort of series of linear uh, resources that have trees and really make the communities more human, and where equity is, of course, a big factor, and a resource for a lot of neighborhoods that have been missing that asset of uh, opportunities for connectivity, for
Mhm.
walkability, for bikeability, and shade.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I do see that this movement is growing of turning our water resources and water treatment and the way that we manage things into a place for the public to also use it, not just for the direct purpose that it was for, but having this indirect purpose of bringing people together and creating community around a space. It's really, really cool, and I've loved the concept for a long time, and it's just really cool to see it. Could you talk about are there certain projects that have already been completed with ULART that you could speak to about ones that have done a good job of bringing that type of community space together?
So, since ULART was recently adopted and approved and submitted to the state as of last year, we are currently in the implementation phase.
Okay.
This is where we evaluate opportunities and undergo feasibility analysis and study, and then we implement and construct and develop projects that are multi-benefit, multi-purposes, and achieve the goals of ULART. So we do have a few projects in the pipeline, and one of those includes our first net zero park that is along two waterways, the Los Angeles River and a tributary, and water would be pumped from the tributary by way of a solar powered, treated on site in a wetland, and placed back into the Los Angeles River cleaner than when it would have arrived from the tributary. So that park is set to break ground for construction at the end of this year. That is called Caballero Creek. And we have a few other projects that are analyzing the potential for removing concrete that is in existence in the Los Angeles River, which is revolutionary and is true river restoration, and would be able to not only control the water, but also make, or I should say, bring our river back to life, and have permeability, impacts for habitat, wildlife, potentially fish restoration. So lots of great benefits in just removing concrete in the Los Angeles River.
Yeah, it's crazy how concrete alone has created so many issues when it comes to water control and water management. Um, so to hear you guys kind of taking it away and seeing how that's changing and can revitalize things is really, really cool. How do you see this issue of water equity growing and evolving over time as well? This feels like it's only just one of the few pieces of the key of the puzzle, not the whole key, right? What are some ways that you see this type of initiative growing and evolving moving forward?
Well, I can you rephrase that question or phrase it again? Because it's a little hard to, what do you, what was,
Yeah,
can you say the question?
so
Mm-hmm.
so water equity as a thing that is occurring as you guys are doing these water equity projects and whatnot, how
Mm-hmm.
do you
Mm-hmm.
see water equity growing or evolving as more projects get done and more
Mm-hmm.
people start to recognize the value of those kinds of projects?
Mm-hmm. So, just to keep, I'm sure Sarah has a few projects she can mention, but to keep it very straightforward and simple, um, part of the concept can be to take away the asphalt in schools or in parking areas, like was done at the LA Zoo, for example, which is right next to the river, where you actually, plant trees and put permeable pavers and just make it, cool the temperature of some of these large expanses of asphalt, especially in public amenities. By the same token, really promoting planting of trees and the right trees in the right places. And in the case of ULART, we could be planting as many as 250,000 trees in that series of tributaries, and creating 9.5 miles of square miles of permeable paving and cover or decomposed granite for walks. And so there's just in carbon sequestration, 315,000 tons of carbon sequestration value. So in never mind habitat, I mean, just bringing birds back and, pollinating and all those factors. So you're going from infrastructural set of solutions that are very hard and very sort of devoid of sort of habitat and human activity to ones that are rich and actually bring value. So 750 miles of green streets, where we're doing not just a tree every 35 feet, but, doing more, sometimes linear planters so that the trees could do better. And, and making sure that the paths along the riverways are multimodal, meaning that, we can maintain them, but also that people can walk and jog and use bicycles and get around. And it's like an alternative mode of transportation, right? If you got to get to school and it used to be there wouldn't be any bridges across these sort of gashes of concrete across the city. Now there can be bridges, and now you could go by bike. If you're a teenager and your high school is 4 miles from your school, and you used to have to wind your way around a very urban area, now you can, they gave me a bridge that brings my neighborhood to my high school. I mean, how awesome is that?
Amazing.
So those are the, so many aspects of this with regards to equity, which are really important to really start giving. And maybe one of the things that it would be interesting for Sarah to describe is that environmental equity sort of screening that is done for these projects.
Yeah. So on that note, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, there is localized flooding in some communities more than others. And Los Angeles is a very flashy area where we get periods of, intense rain and then none whatsoever. So water equity is really under equity in general and how water holistically contributes to our natural resources. And, one of the areas that we focused on, a very morbid reality is that children crossing these urban waterways drowned and unfortunately did not survive. So we say, that was not in vain. And we're going to focus a project here, although not evidently environmental. A bridge is going to connect natural resources, being the waterway, to communities, and it's going to therefore enhance communities.
Mhm.
We jointly with Studio MLA and Tetra Tech looked at where was their local flooding. We heard from the community firsthand, who knows their community better than us, where that localized flooding occurred. And then we overlaid that map with what's called the CalEnviro screen, which looks at community impact and categorizes communities as disadvantaged and have more burdens than others. And that's where we focused a lot of our planning. So to tie in water, flooding, equity, and bring resources and enhance communities.
Mhm.
I would add to, each of these tributaries had their own sort of characteristics and personalities, but one of the things they shared was that they had been burdened by either, they had to choose a freeway underpass and overpass to sort of place, or an industrial, sort of complex. It would be in these areas, as the city was growing. And that's what brought this, basically high level of pollution, a lot of asthma. I was really stunned at the high levels of asthma in these areas. And so the idea that idea that the state would actually put forward funding through this legislation to reverse the ills of the past is pretty great.
Mhm.
In terms of how fast these projects get built, it took 2 years to do the plan. It's been about a year since we finished it, and it was one of the first plans that was approved on Zoom unanimously by all the elected officials and others that were represented in the working groups. and it was really fantastic. It's a, and so it moved forward, and so now it's a matter of coordinating all the efforts from the nonprofits and other leadership groups who are putting forward projects with the elected officials to really strategize how many projects can get accomplished in the different tributaries over a 1 or 2 year period.
Yeah. So I wanted to get to kind of the last couple of questions that I had here. One was kind of the importance of this for utilities. Could you speak to why utilities should be thinking about these types of projects that will connect their communities a little bit better, and and what steps can they take then to start trying to take action on that?
You know, it's interesting you ask that because many of the waterways have utility easement corridors along them
Hmm.
and are utilized for purposes that the utilities need. And our plan, although doesn't enforce or require them to think beyond a single purpose, with all of the pressure that comes from the community engagement and the community input, as well as the local leaders and electeds that were part of this plan, we developed several opportunities that are on these utility easement corridors that get them to, in fact, not think so single purpose and be more multi benefit and be of a resource to the community, right? We only have so much land. Let's make it usable by as many as possible and utilize it in an optimal manner for everyone.
Hmm.
I think I would be remiss if we didn't mention that we do have very forward-thinking agencies, including the Department of Water and Power and sanitation and other departments that are, for example, some of the water in these tributaries and in the river are really from reclamation plants, and
Hmm.
the water is cleansed to an incredible level so that it could be used for irrigation, for example. So, and the other thing about these tributaries is that they actually sort of come up to, obviously they have a relationship to our mountains. And there's been planning efforts around the mountains to start really thinking about how some of the people in terms of equity, some of the people who live in these areas can actually enjoy and be able to go on hikes to the mountains and from home, you know,
Hmm.
and that by actually weaving paths and weaving streetscapes and weaving ways of sort of really um, eh, sort of taking advantage of several sort of sources of funding, that you start creating a more livable, equitable city that also meets not only city and county, but also state legislation around air quality and water quality, and now, of course, President Biden's big, uh, you know, 30 by 30 sort of plan. So I think there's a lot of commitment to um, these objectives that are really intertwined and really very much so is very exciting for those of us who've been working for some decades in the water space, so to speak.
Hmm. Yeah. I totally hear you, and it's really cool to see what you guys are doing with ULART out there, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of those projects coming to fruition and whatnot. And like you said, the administration for things on this seems to be buying into it as well, and I'm sure that Radhika Fox at the EPA, who used to be with the U.S. Water Alliance, she's a big champion of projects and moving things forward like this, especially with water equity. So great to see that, you know, she's got part of the culture of that administration now leading the U.S. EPA of water. So thank you guys so much for being with us today. We appreciate your time and for everyone who's watching, we will have a link to some of the ULART resources down below. You can check them out, see what they're doing, and learn some more. And to you guys, thank you so much for joining me on the call today.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.